What's up, family? How y'all doing, man? I hope good today. My day's been going pretty good, and I'm gonna just jump right in. With a lot of the spiritual stuff I talk about with people, I end up using these specific terms that people don't quite understand yet. And it makes sense because they don't teach it this way in schools. They don't really want you to understand this. Because once you understand these things, you can gain power of your mind, and they'd rather your mind be a slave to them. So today I'm going to talk about what the ego is. Now, in simplest terms, the ego is your body's defense mechanism. Now, what do I mean by that? Pretty much think of it as the instinctual driven side of you. So it is the side that pretty much paints your identity. Your ego is the I. That's where the word comes from. It means I in, I think it's Latin. I could be wrong though. I know it means I in whatever language it came from. But what it is the self defense mechanism that is pretty much based on what you desire and what you fear. So, for example, the ego would be a thought process or an identity, or you can call it defense mechanism, anything that pretty much will point you in the direction that your body most enjoys, the most comfortable position. So, for example, if you have social anxiety, right? And you're walking in a store and you're thinking about how you're going to talk to the cashier when you check out. That's your ego talking because something in the past made it to where your body, your mind was afraid or even traumatized from a social situation. And you can look at it in another way as well. The ego will cause you to go after your desires. And if your desire is comfort, that's what your mind will be based on. The ego is the collection of thoughts always racing through your head, pretty much. It is your subconscious mind. Pretty much whatever you've experienced in your life will shape your ego. But the problem with the ego is that the ego doesn't understand the bigger picture. It doesn't understand your goals. It can't. It's a process, it's a defense mechanism. The point of the ego is to keep you safe from the shit that just exists, you know? And the only way to ascend this ego is to realize that you are not the ego. A lot of people tend to think that the thoughts they have inside their heads, their opinions, their ideas, their identity, their name, their age, all this stuff is them, but it's not. You see that this outside body is just a matrix. It is not real because the entire world is a reflection of your mind, right? So, what the ego tends to do is trap people in loops and cycles. For example, if you have anxiety, the ego is the source that causes this anxiety. It's the continuous racing of thoughts in your head that make you more and more anxious toward a certain thing. So if you fear something, that stems from the ego, right? It is the collection of thoughts that keep your body most comfortable. So if you're scared of something, your body wants to not face it. Your body doesn't want to see something that scares it. So it's going to make your mind want to avoid it as much as possible, right? Now, what we have to do is break from this ego. You realize that you are the observer. The fact that you can hear these thoughts, you can see them, you can visualize them, means that you are not the thoughts. The thoughts are coming to you, and you're watching them and deciding how to act on them. That's why you can face your fears. That's why if, let's say I have a drug addiction and let's say I smoke a lot of weed, right? and one day I'm thinking of quitting, but my mind is telling me, smoke, you want to smoke. I can resist that because I am not my thoughts. I am not the ego itself. I am the observer, right? So that's the difference between the observer, also known as the higher self, and the ego, which is the lower self. So the point of spirituality and meditation is to get as far away from the ego as possible and delve into the higher self. And the higher self is not usually, it always is the silent observer. It is the part of you that does not speak and instead watches. That's why when you meditate, you try to clear all the thoughts from your head, or you try to control your thoughts. Either way, the point is to not let your desires and your thoughts overtake you during meditation. That's why when you see a guru, they usually don't talk too much. It's because they're not thinking as much. They're focusing on what's important instead of what makes them comfortable and what scares them and what they want. See, your name, whatever your name is not a real name. You're an animal. You're a mammal. You came to this planet as a baby. You didn't have a name. The government and society created the idea of identity, and that's the best way they can trap you. Because at the moment we're in, the Matrix, it's extremely based on not the individual, but rather collective groups that are made to hate each other. So what people do with their ego is they take information from sources that they deem credible, or sources that pretty much makes them either puts them in fear or makes them feel comfortable, right? Now, these people, they direct people's identity. For example, politicians, religious leaders, celebrities, all these people direct the ego. They shape your identity based on themselves and their own beliefs. So in that way, they can control the population, because if you make the ego of all people in a group the same, their true individuality is not going to come, and then they won't be able to really speak their minds. They can only speak what they know from the ego. So the ego is the lower self. The ego is the thing telling you to do drugs, the thing telling you to have sex, the thing telling you to commit sin, the thing that has you focusing on money. That's what the ego does to you. The ego, like I said, it's the spiral of thoughts in your head. What you have to do as someone practicing spirituality is break away from the ego and instead live in a higher plane. Live in silence where you don't judge things, you just allow them to pass. What the issue with people who are, let's say, depressed and anxious is that they feed too much into those ego thoughts, and they want them to continue, and instead of finding a way out, they continuously think about their ego. They continuously think about the events in their life. And all anxiety is a belief that you know the outcome of things that didn't happen yet. The belief that you have the outcome of the past or of the future. Being excited and being anxious are the same thing, but opposites, right? Being excited is when you see a future event coming and you are excited for it. You think it's going to be amazing. You think it's going to be pleasant. Therefore, you're excited. Anxious is the opposite. When you believe that you can see a future event or the outcome of something, but it'll be negative. It'll be scary. And that's your ego speaking to you. That is your ego punishing you based on your lack of individuality and freedom. The way to break from the ego is to not listen to it, to forget about it. Once you forget about the ego, your higher self takes over and your true purpose in life begins. You see, the ego is the thing that trapped us in prisons. The ego is the thing that puts us in school and has us, institutionalized and brainwashed to believe and think in a certain way. And the ego is a thing that traps us and puts us in a negative state. It's the reason why people say that they feel lost and hopeless and they feel like there's no purpose in life is because their ego has taken control of their mind. Your fear and your desires have taken over your true purpose because you are not willing to face the demons that lurk within the ego. To break from the ego, you have to deal with the ego. You have to kill the demons, or at least fight them and incorporate them into yourself. You have to beat those demons and allow your ego to dissipate, to dissolve. And the biggest downside of the ego is the numbness, the pain. With the ego, you can't truly ever be happy. That's why all these rappers, all these celebrities, they seem happy because they've milked their ego to the max point. These rappers who flaunt all their money and wear all this jewelry, they're not really happy on the inside. Their ego is just completely fueled. But what you understand is whatever goes up has to come down. So these rappers that are having sex with 10 different women every day, smoking so much weed, 20 blunts a day, taking Xans, drinking lean, yeah, it feels good for them in the moment, but everything comes back down. It's a cycle of karma. And that's the trap of the ego. And the ego makes you search for pleasures or comfort that is very short term, that is very temporary and superficial. Now, when you give in to these lower desires, the karmic cycle pretty much traps you. And it's not the fault of the universe, it's not the fault of you, but you have to take responsibility for it once you gain insight of it. Now, the ego is an essential part of life, because without the ego, you likely would not survive, because the ego is, for example, if you see a tiger coming, your ego is going to say, get the fuck out of there, because you know what tigers can do to you, right? That's your fight or flight response. But when people have panic attacks, it's due to the ego, because the fight or flight response is being utilized in a part of your life where it shouldn't be. It's just an issue with the brain because you've allowed your survival mechanism to take over your life. What I'm saying is, you're not living to live. That is a higher self life. You are living not to die. Or I could say it this way, you are dying to live. That's what the ego does to you. Now, if you guys have any questions about the ego, how to break from the ego, let me know in the comments, or just give me any type of questions and I'll answer them. For now, I appreciate you guys, and I'll see you later. Third eye, good eye, good. I fucked it up. Third eye, goodbye, family.